Dark Souls 2 is undeniably one of the most interesting games I've ever played. When creating art, many endeavor to innovate. Innovation or creating something unique is how you leave your mark on mediums. Legacy and being remembered are what most strive to do, like 1993's Doom, 1996's Mario 64, 2000's Diablo 2 or Deus Ex. These games are often praised for introducing and or revolutionizing concepts that are still relevant as of writing this. Today, however, innovation is much harder. Unlike the experimental nature of the early 90s to the late 2000s, the industry is far more mature and homogenous. Thanks to the commercialization of games, content creation, and no shortage of opinions online, the community has made it clear what's accepted and what isn't. As such, developers have frameworks to innovate within, and after a lot of trial and error, developers can bring their visions to life. And in the case of Miyazaki, this was Dark Souls. I don't think I need to explain why Dark Souls is important, but this game was effectively the byproduct of years of learning and refinement. Dark Souls thrusted Miyazaki and FromSoftware into the limelight, creating a genre and becoming one of the most influential games of all time. Bandai Namco immediately saw the game's success and greenlit what I believe to be one of the most interesting sequels ever. Rather than refining or smoothing out the original's rough edges, Tomohiro Shibuya and Yui Tanimura had very different visions of what Dark Souls was. For those who don't know, Dark Souls was initially co-directed by Shibuya and Tanimura. After not being pleased with DS2's direction, FromSoft removed Shibuya, asked Tanimura to fix the game, and Miyazaki, who was working on Bloodborne at the time, was assigned as a supervisor. With minimal time, Tanimura repurposed existing assets, rewrote the story, pieced together what he could, and Dark Souls 2 was born. At launch, DS2 was showered with critical praise like the original, but the community was polarized immediately. DS2 is by far the most controversial Dark Souls game. If you ask 10 random people for their thoughts on the game, I wouldn't be surprised if most of them said it was bad, while the minorities said it was their favorite. It's a divisive game that many will defend and even more will hate. What makes DS2 stand out to me is how different it is from the rest of the series. Initially, I'll be honest, I hated this game because it felt different. I thought the bosses were lacking, and I also didn't agree with some of the design decisions. And after sitting on it for a few days, I found myself confronted with one question that ultimately brought me to make this video. Why? After accepting Dark Souls 2 for what it is rather than what it isn't, I still don't understand what they were going for. In my opinion, Dark Souls 2 is a game that unnecessarily reinvents itself. Many of the changes feel at odds with DS's core design philosophy and left me astonished the more I thought about it. From what I've heard from fans and friends who enjoy this game, DS2 was their gateway into Souls and FromSoft by extension. If this is your introduction to the series, it's no surprise why you'd enjoy it. The purpose of this video isn't to attack or even to change anybody's mind. If you enjoy Dark Souls 2, more power to you, and if you hate the game, dope. I want to dive into my nuanced relationship with this game and why I think it's alright even if it is my least favorite Souls game. The first thing players will immediately feel is the new movement, so let's start with that. Demon Souls and Dark Souls feature slow and very deliberate movement systems. This pace was designed to provide players with ample time to identify, process, and formulate a strategy to avoid an oncoming attack and defend themselves. At the time, we didn't think much of pace because this is, well, all we had. DS2, however, slowed this pace down even further. Now it takes longer to attack, roll, drink your Estus, cast magic, and do pretty much everything. Like I said earlier, this wasn't an issue if DS2 was your intro, but it must have felt sluggish to fans of the original at the time. I know a lot of people still complain about DS2's slow nature, and it's only going to get worse as Souls games become faster, but I'd argue this is the most subjective criticism the game receives. Personally, I think DS2's slower nature works since the entire game moves at this pace. The flow of combat feels much more methodical since we have more than enough time to identify startup animations, we are slower, and attacks have clear weaknesses. In many ways, this is a great intro to Souls, I'd argue. As someone who enjoys Bloodborne, Nioh, and Lies of P, I wouldn't be surprised if new players had a hard time keeping up with the pace of these games. In addition to getting used to Souls mechanics like the weight system, the general flow of combat in these games are much faster. To enjoy them, players must read, process, and react effectively if they want to survive. DS2 conversely alleviates this issue with its slower tempo. That said, however, calling DS2 an easy game would be facetious. Unanimously attributing Souls' difficulty to our inability to react is dangerously stupid. It's also worth mentioning the difficulty of these games scales with how many you've completed. Learning which attributes you're investing into and how scaling functions is literally half the battle. Coming from DS1, I really hated how DS2 felt, but honestly, this was more of a personal problem. The directors clearly envisioned this game feeling slower, and it works for what it wanted to accomplish. And while this sounds good in theory, the emotional whiplash of dodging an attack and still getting hit is kind of bizarre. Unsatisfied with simply changing the flow of combat, DS2 went out of its way to revamp revamp how stats and attributes function as well. The reason why the early game roll feels bad is because of the newly introduced stat adaptability. Adaptability generally increases our defense and agility. Defense and resistances are self-explanatory, but agility is tied to the number of invincibility frames during a roll. While less divisive than the new pace of combat, this change carries some strange ramifications as well. I'd like to imagine that adaptability introduced 3 scenarios to players. Scenario 1, you played Dark Souls 1, you think this roll sucks, go to complain online, learn about adaptability, and level it up. Scenario 2, you never play Dark Souls 1, adapt to DS2's roll, and potentially never touch the stat again. Or path 3, you're aware of adaptability and level it up to be more in line with other DS's rolls. Rather than asking why roles were changed, I'm far more curious of what feedback prompted this or what they were trying to achieve here. Implementing a stat allowing players to customize their roles sounds like a good idea on the surface. Providing RPGs with more options is seldom a bad idea in my opinion. Where it falls flat is with its execution. It's hard to assess why base roles feel so bad. I know a lot of people think it's bad, but the reason it's bad is because it's so fundamentally different from other Souls games' roles. So hypothetically speaking, if DS2 was your first Souls game, adaptability was removed, and we were stuck with this base role, the conversation would shift to other Souls games are too forgiving. As such, I think it's hard to call the base role bad. Compared to other Souls games, I agree DS2's base roll is bad and it's annoying we have to invest in the stat, but I don't know. I'm sure there's people out there who've beaten the game with the base roll. Anyways, adaptability wasn't the only stat that was changed. DS2 sought out to revamp how stats overall function and reworked mechanics like scaling, kind of. After beating DS once or twice, you'll probably stop investing in vigor and vitality amongst other stats. Something nice about DS2's skills is how leveling up one stat influences others. As you can tell from the footage, I'm notoriously bad about giving myself more health or increasing my equip load since I'm usually satisfied with dodging and hitting hard. What's nice about investing in faith like I did in this run is how it increased my casting speed, enhanced my lightning resistance, and most importantly, provided me with more health. For context, all the additional health I received came from increasing my dexterity, faith, and attunement rather than increasing my vigor. It's probably a niche thing since no one cares about it, but I think it's nice. What isn't nice is how weapon scaling's been reworked. Without diving too deep into the nuance here, weapon scaling provides players with bonus damage based on a weapon's letter ranking. The letter indicates which stat the weapon scales with and how effective it is. For this playthrough, I did Uchigatana Miracles run. Miracles require faith, so I dumped most of my points into faith and dexterity. Initially, the Uchigatana only scaled with dexterity, but I didn't have many points invested in it at the time. And after finding a Thunderstone, I enchanted the katana to scale with faith and dexterity instead of only dexterity. As you can see, this weapon has a beast scaling in both dexterity and faith, so I invested into both evenly. What makes DS2 scaling unique is how damage is calculated and how some of the letters are just straight up propaganda. In short, weapons in DS2 don't scale properly. Strength builds are remarkably effective, and infusing weapons with elements are pretty strong. In DS2, however, you can have 3 quality weapons scaling with strength and dexterity that all receive different bonus damage amounts. Furthermore, strength, regardless of the weapon scaling, will almost always provide more bonus damage than any other stat. And lastly, weapons infused with elements like thunder or fire will preserve some of their original scaling. The biggest sin DS2 scaling commits is blatantly lying about how scaling functions. On one hand, withholding information from players and further misleading us in an already esoteric system is pretty dumb. I also don't understand why strength just scales better than almost everything else. If you're aware of how these systems function, you can have a ton of fun with your build. DS2 provides another layer of nuance and almost intimacy with how the mechanics function. They're similar enough to the original where you can just play the game and have fun, but players looking to min-max and understand the system's nuances will be rewarded with seemingly infinite replay value. Like my thoughts on adaptability and pretty much everything else in this video, I have no idea what prompted leadership to make this change. Again, what was so wrong with DS1's approach, and what were they trying to achieve with these systemic changes? However I look at it, I can't wrap my mind around why they did this, and unfortunately I share the same sense of frustration with the health bar changes and Ring of Binding. Each time you die in DS2, a portion of your health bar is sealed, which can be restored by using a human effigy. Losing a bit of health isn't that bad, and human effigies are plentiful, so why am I complaining about this? Well, if life is easy to restore and the Ring of Binding reduces the amount of life lost, like why is this even here? My guess is to make the game harder. The issue with this approach was leadership's fundamental misunderstanding of why Souls games are difficult, but we're starting to get ahead of ourselves. The health loss mechanic is a concept FromSoft has flirted with since Demon Souls. DS1 mostly doesn't have this, Bloodborne doesn't have this, DS3 has Embers which boost your health, and Elden Ring doesn't have this. The reason DS2's execution here feels awful is because of how aimless it feels. The Ring of Binding is one of the earliest rings you'll receive. After finding it, you'll probably equip it, forget about it, and play the game with 3 ring slots. You can obviously not use the ring, but reducing the amount of health loss while hollow in a game centered around dying makes this one of the best rings in the game. Since I mentioned learning from dying, the next criticism is aimed at every Souls or Souls-like game with mechanics that temporarily remove health. This mechanic is directly at odds with the Souls formula's core design philosophy. Dying in Souls games are an opportunity to learn. Whether it's an attack, exploring an area, or dying to a trap, something is always gained in your death. However, each time you die, you drop your souls unless you're using a ring or something to prevent this. Souls are your lifeline. They're used to level you up, buy items, upgrade your equipment, and more. Dropping these upon death creates tension as dying again means they'll disappear forever. Personally, I think the risk of losing everything is punishing enough. Potentially losing, again, your lifeline for progression is absolutely crushing. First time players will already die a ton to bosses and during exploration, yet tripling down the difficulty by reducing your life feels like rubbing salt in the wound and nothing else. Death is a tool leveraged by developers to reinforce the intended design philosophy of these games, and in the case of Dark Souls 2, human effigies are so plentiful that it doesn't make sense why this was implemented in the first place. You'll also have a plethora of healing items between the various life stones and your Estus flask, further devaluing the weight of losing health. Losing health in Souls games isn't the worst idea ever, but it needs to be deliberately executed. The reason Dark Souls 2's execution feels so problematic is because FromSoft never fully commits to it here. If there was no Ring of Binding, only certain bosses reduced your health, human effigies were scarce, the level design was more consistent, and a myriad of ways to circumvent health loss weren't introduced, it might have been a different story. Instead, we're left with a mechanic introducing more frustration than actual meaningful difficulty. Ultimately, this design choice feels superfluous, which unfortunately is kind of Dark Souls 2's ethos. Since I mentioned DS2's level design, let's spend a few minutes discussing it, the overall world design, and the enemies populating them. DS2's enemies are mostly fine outside of a few interesting hitboxes. I know DS2 is the poster boy for bad hitboxes, but every Souls game has some jank. I'll leave arguing whether DS2 is the worst of the community. In yet another case of why would you do this, DS2 famously features enemies that stop spawning. For those who haven't played DS2, after killing enemies enough times, they'll just stop spawning. The knee-jerk defense here is to incentivize players to use bonfire aesthetics, which I have no problem with. Bonfire aesthetics are definitely one of DS2's best innovations along with the New Game Plus changes. Instead of simply defending enemies that stop spawning, I want to dive a little deeper. Now, it really could be as simple as telling players to use bonfire aesthetics, but I think there's a glaring flaw with DS2's approach here. Dark Souls and other Souls games by extension build the reputation off of their difficulty. I mean, the original PC release of Dark Souls is literally called the Prepare to Die edition. The marketing team clearly knew what they were doing. As such, and this is purely speculative, I think Tanimura attributed a lot of DS1's success to its difficulty and sought to redefine it in the sequel. Difficulty, alone at least, is a nebulous term. It'd be like me calling Dark Souls 2 a problematic game and just rolling the outro. These words don't tell you much, and it's up to you to interpret them. Before Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree released, Miyazaki did an interview with Game Informer and spoke about design decisions. After discussing his approach to level design, Miyazaki states,
"It's not a matter of simply cranking up the difficulty. It's doing so fairly. When players are killed, they can understand why they were killed in an instance, and it feels justified. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. That's the game design we're trying to achieve. I know a lot of players out there are probably going to disagree. What are you talking about? This game doesn't make sense, what the heck? But we try to make sure that there's a learning curve and a feedback loop that the players are able to extract from, that they can then bring into the next attempt. We believe in difficult games, but not games that are unjustly or unfairly so. But of course, there's still room for improvement on our side as well."
As Miyazaki stated, creating a fair game is a core tenet of his design philosophy. Sure, you're going to die, it's going to be punishing at times, and there's going to be a lot of trial and error, but it feels like the team is rooting for us to overcome these challenges. As Miyazaki mentioned earlier, the difficulty is intentional. Death is a tool used to enforce his vision. We're meant to learn and improve each time we die. This approach to game design feels distinctly 80s and 90s, where games were designed to steal your coins or just built to be challenging. Games that released 30 to 40 years ago were shorter, had unlockables after beating them, and were actually pretty hard. If you wanted to beat them, you either needed a ton of patience or you had to learn from your mistakes. What separates Dark Souls from other games leveraging this design philosophy is with its RPG mechanics. Making RPGs more difficult usually means changing damage values or just grinding your problems away. When levels are introduced and visible to us, players typically grind to around that level, or they become overleveled doing all the side quests. What makes Dark Souls so unique is how these options are deterred. Bosses don't have levels, you can grind if you want, and you can complete side quests, but none of these options, unless you're upgrading your weapon or armor, which, I mean, let's be honest, who the hell upgrades their armor, will make a boss fight easier, which finally brings us back to DS2's enemies. Assuming the impetus of enemies not spawning was to encourage the use of bonfire aesthetics and prevent players from grinding souls, I don't think Tanamura fundamentally understands why Dark Souls even works. Leveling up a few times won't drastically shift how you approach bosses. There are some edge cases where you can grind out souls for better magic, additional attunement slots, or materials to upgrade your weapons, but boss battles, as Miyazaki noted, are designed to provide players with meaningful friction. What makes the steep learning curve of each boss so rewarding is the fairness rooted in it. Each attack has a weakness, or at least a way to mitigate damage. Figuring out these bosses and leveraging systems accordingly provides a sense of fulfillment that only exists in challenging games. This sense of achievement is why people spend time playing Dark Souls, fighting games, esports titles, and other challenging games. And if my theory about DS2's despawning enemies are correct, I think Tanamura again is missing the forest for the trees. I don't know about everyone else, but I don't play Souls games simply because they're hard. If you think Dark Souls garnered critical acclaim and a huge following simply for its difficulty and aspired to make the sequel harder, you're missing the point or don't understand why players have hundreds of hours in these games. We don't level up to make boss battles easier, we don't quit the game because the boss battle is too hard, and we love difficulty when it's properly executed, and yet Dark Souls 2 doesn't understand any of this. When talking about Dark Souls 2 in my Discord, which you should join if you haven't, Mark, Liza P. Glazer, which is a crazy but relatable name, put it best. I tell everyone that my favorite thing about DS2 is that it legitimately hates you. There's just mean-spirited shit in the game for no reason, just for laughs. Now, before anybody attacks Mark, he and I both enjoy DS2, him definitely more so than I do, and like I said, there's parts of it that I really enjoy, like some of the reworked mechanics, story, and other stuff, and I also think that some of the level design is outstanding. I know I just had a lot of negative things to say, but this game has a following for a reason. There's just a bunch of head-scratching decisions or inconsistencies that are hard to ignore on your first playthrough. Nevertheless, there's a reason this game has a cult following. If this game was all bad, I wouldn't be writing this video, so let's revisit what I meant by some of the level design being good. DS2's level design is best described as a series of highs and lows. I think it has some of the best and some of the worst areas in the series. Where DS2 shines is with its new direction. Most of the early game levels have this sense of exploration to them. Levels are much larger and feel more expansive with numerous paths, treasure to find, and sometimes optional enemies. DS2 also does an exceptional job at easing players into this new design. The Forest of Fallen Giants and the Last Bastille start as linear paths before gradually expanding into much larger areas. Reaching the Cardinal Tower presents players with several options. You can either head straight to the boss room, explore this area with broken down homes, stumble upon these caves, get stabbed in the back by this NPC, find other paths, and really approach this area however you'd like. The open level nature of this area is practically begging players to explore. I think most people take their time to explore and find items that will help them. This same approach can be found with the Last Bastille as well. There are so many ways to approach this castle that it can be overwhelming in the best way possible. There are tons of secrets, additional bosses, a new blacksmith, NPCs, and more to find here. There's also a suite of great enemies found here as well. While very simple, I also like how we can interact with the environment. The fragrant branch of yore is pretty whatever, but it's cool how you can blow up this wall with the barrel to unlock McDuff. And after beating the Rune Sentinel trio, this level feels almost labyrinthian with the volume of interconnected paths and sheer volume of things to discover. Something I haven't mentioned yet is how DS2 introduced torches, which obviously provides us with light, right? Like, who would have thought? As a matter of fact, why is this even in the script? I bring this up because the Last Bastille and areas like the gutter are designed around them. The Last Bastille's boss battle, the Lost Sinner, is set in this initially dark room. I know we all entered this room when it was near pitch black before and couldn't see anything. Forcing us to illuminate the room adds to the fight's atmosphere, and it's a great use of the torch. Honestly, if I ever play this game again, I probably won't light up the area and just fight using a torch. It sounds cool, terrifying, and probably annoying to fight this boss in the dark. I also love how the torch illuminates your path in the gutter. The gutter is this dark area with poisonous statues and enemies all around. Because this place is so dark, players have to light these posts while doing some platforming as they carefully find a way forward. My personal favorite part of the gutter is how your progress is, well, literally illuminated. Each time you die and spawn back at the bonfire, more of the gutter will be lit up. Not only does this look cool, but it also visually illustrates how much progress we've made. It's a neat way of communicating progression to players that doesn't go unnoticed like the platforming improvements. Platforming in Souls games is more of a meme than a mechanic, honestly, but jumping around in DS2 is actually kind of fun with the new horizontal momentum. On a side note, whoever decided to remap the jump button from circle or B to L3 or left stick needs a promotion. Another thing that's very impressive about the levels are the enemies. I don't think this is praised enough, but FromSoft's enemy variety is sublime. Enemy variety is important for keeping combat fresh and often carries narrative implications. If you've seen any of my videos, you'll know that I adore games with rich atmosphere, and DS2 is filled with it. As you stumble upon and defeat enemies, you'll be thinking to yourself, what happened? Why are you here? And how'd you get like this? If the gameplay loop doesn't push you forward, the atmosphere, story, and PvP, if you're into that for whatever reason, certainly will. Furthermore, some areas like Hyde's Tower of Flame are absolutely gorgeous. I remember arriving in this area during my first playthrough and just having my jaw drop. The architecture, enemies, gorgeous lighting, the sunset in the distance, the serene water, and exploring the remnants of what could have been this grand city connected by fragmented areas is unforgettable. Fighting soldiers in this small coliseum with other guards watching as god rays pierce the room feels like the beginning or end of a legendary adventure. My mind at the time was filled with excitement and optimism until beating the Dragon Rider. Following this battle, you take an elevator to No Man's Wharf, which is a solid area, all things considered, but man, I wish Hyde's Tower of Flame was just one of the more expansive areas. And while DS2 is filled with countless memorable places like Dragon's Eyrie and Drang Lake Castle, it also features some of the worst areas in the series, the Black Gulch, Iron Keep, and Shrine of Amana. Criticizing Souls games are always strange. The nature of these games have cultivated a sizable fanbase that loves a good challenge. From the first boss, we're taught that problem solving is essential if you want to beat these games. You'll have to get creative with bosses, learn where enemies are, read context clues, find each move's weakness, or as the community puts it, get good. Friction is good in games, and the sense of achievement we get from completing a challenging area, discovering the map loop, or beating a boss is the reason we come back to these games. Nevertheless, let's not act like all of FromSoft's games don't have some bullshit, gotcha moments, or just straight up poorly designed. Something the Souls community has made a bit of a habit out of is dismissing legitimate criticisms behind the get good argument. The game is supposed to be hard, why are you complaining, and get better are frequent and somewhat reasonable rebuttals, but let's not act like we missed DS1's curse, stockpiling blood vials in Bloodborne, and how most of us skip the Capra Demon on future playthroughs. Sure, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, but let's not ignore the minor faults either. If we can have nuanced criticisms and open discussions for games hailed as masterpieces, Demon Souls, Dark Souls, Bloodborne, Sekiro, and Elden Ring should be held to the same standard in my opinion. Anyways, DS2, like DS1 or my personal favorite DS3, has some stinkers in it like the Black Gulch. I'm not gonna lie to you, I don't even know where to start with this one. I guess we can start with the positives. It's short, and that's it. The Black Gulch is this small area filled with poison-throwing statues, enemies hiding in puddles, an obligatory invader, a save point blocked by a fragrant branch of yore, and a few alternative paths the internet or some sweet angel told you about on the floor. With how tiny this place is and dense with enemies it is, we're encouraged to... Actually, let me try that again. we're forced to take it slow. The intended form of progression is to inch forward, destroying each of the statues and lighting each puddle on fire. If you simply run through this area and refuse to progress through it properly, you'll die of poison, which rapidly drains your life bar. When you inevitably die, you'll have to destroy these statues each time you want to explore or get to the boss room. Destroying these statues each time you die will quickly test your patience since there's a lot of them, and when you're exhausted and instinctually run by everything, you'll be punished with poison as you burn through resources racing to the boss room. Speaking of the boss room, some of the boss fight runs or placements of these bonfires are kind of diabolical. Not funny, haha, I see what you're going for, diabolical, but what the hell are you thinking, diabolical? This is definitely more of a series-wide criticism, but DS2 might be the worst offender here. The boss run to the Rotten, both Smelter Demons, Demon of Song, and several other areas are awful, and since I probably won't have another chance to talk about this, Nidos, Seats, and the Four Kings have some hilarious boss runs as well. Getting to the boss feels like half the fight. It also doesn't help that most of DS2's boss fights are either forgettable or just straight up mediocre. I don't get it, man. I would have loved to be a fly on the wall when they designed some of these levels. Like, how did making the boss run longer even come up in discussion? Making these runs longer feels more tedious and frustrating in my opinion. It also doesn't really help that enemies really chase you in this game. If you're trying to get somewhere and reach a roadblock, you better believe the entire map is coming after you. Enemies feel like these blood-starved creatures that are prepared to hunt you down to the ends of the earth. So I'll be honest, before revisiting this game on stream, I remembered being more frustrated and not really enjoying the level design. Believe it or not, the original outline was even more negative here, but when I started writing this script and had footage playing on my other monitor, I actually found myself really enjoying DS2's overall level design. For a game that went through development hell, there's a ton of variety here, and I found myself enjoying more than I didn't. The DLC also has some incredible levels that emphasize just how rushed the vanilla game was. If Tanimura had more time and potentially directed the sequel alone, maybe the entire game would have been like this. Yet, it's hard to ignore places like the Shrine of Amana and the good old Iron Keep, which should have been reworked in the re-release. Then again, I haven't played the original, so these could have all been improved for all I know, which is even more concerning. Speaking of concerns, one of the most vocal complaints from the community back in the day was the lack of interconnected world. I don't know if this is still an issue in 2025, but all these threads from 2014 speak for themselves. I wouldn't be surprised if arriving here broke people's immersion. If you want your world to make logical sense and follow the predecessor's formula, I get why you're frustrated, but you can get pretty creative when locations don't have to make any logical sense either. Interconnected worlds like Lordran and Yharnam must make logical sense. Whether it's diving to the depths of hell or ascending to heights yet seen, immersion starts with believability. In terms of overall game design, however, DS2's branching paths didn't really bother me honestly. I'd be lying if I said I didn't miss the interconnected world, but its absence resulted in some experimental world design that's charming in its own regards. And as much as I love DS3's world, it doesn't receive nearly as much criticism for its design either. Unless the game fundamentally changed with the Scholars of the First Sin update, I think a lot of the hate DS2's overall world receives was a knee-jerk reaction coming from DS1. Let's not forget, DS2's world design has a lot in common with Demon's Souls as well. Now, to be fair to fans, I can't imagine going from DS1, DS2 gets announced, everyone's hyped, and they get a game that's so wildly different from the original. Oh well, at least DS2 has Majula, which is probably one of my favorite hubs in gaming. Between the music, NPCs, views, and being called the bearer of the curse, this place just feels like home. It's a great area to level up and just kind of vibe and get your thoughts together. FromSoft probably knew what they were doing when making this place, since the rest of the game can feel so punishing. As stated earlier, between losing health and despawning enemies, I think Tanimura and FromSoft learned the wrong lessons from the original success. Instead of a game filled with meaningful difficulty, I think Dark Souls 2 is best described as hard for the sake of being hard. Tanimura's challenge feels like it's derived from level exploration, abundance of traps, a plethora of ambushes, occasional resource scarcity, enemies detecting you from a mile away, and losing a bit of health with each death. DS1 features almost all these mechanics as well, but its execution is more focused, meaningful, and ultimately rewarding. While there are countless examples I can use from DS1, I think Sense Fortress best illustrates this. Sense Fortress, or Sense Funhouse as my friend calls it, is this giant castle you have to climb before reaching on Orlando. While Sense Fortress is fondly remembered for its plethora of traps and challenging difficulty, it's also one of the best designed areas in the game. Sense Fortress greets you with floor traps and these swinging axes, which in addition to giant cannonball, serve as the main gimmick to this place. Stepping on the floor traps will cause arrows and other traps to attack you. Like everything in this place, it would behoove you to avoid these at all costs, as bonfires are very scarce. If you're anything like me, you'll probably die to 10 of these floor traps or misjudge when these swinging axes come down. Sense Fortress demands players to pay attention to their environments if they want to survive. How frequent do these axes swing? Which direction is the cannonball headed? Where are the traps? And have I explored everything? Will circulate your mind as you desperately try to reach the top. My favorite examples of Dark Souls demanding player focus are this elevator and how mimics are introduced. I, like probably most of you, died to both of these on my first playthrough. I'm sure I'm not alone in saying this, but both these moments are so memorable because of how FromSoft subverts player expectations and the brilliant environmental storytelling accompanying them. As you explore Lordran, you'll come across a ton of elevators moving you throughout the map. We usually just press a button or they're moving on their own. Elevators are introduced as a safe space. We get on them and they safely take us someplace. What makes this elevator so memorable is where players psychologically are and the brilliant environmental storytelling accompanying it. So picture this, it's your first time playing Dark Souls and you make it to Sense Fortress. You've probably died to countless floor traps, got flattened out by cannonballs, died to the serpent soldiers, or got sent to the Shadow Realm. You're tired, you're exhausted, frustrated, and most importantly, you're desperate. Making it further than you ever have, you see an elevator, remember all the good times you've spent on elevators, and hastily get on, only to die. Miyazaki and FromSoft brilliantly subvert player expectations by turning an elevator, something that's usually comforting, into one of Sense Fortress's deadliest traps. Honestly, this was probably a traumatic experience for Dark Souls players. There's plenty of ambushes, traps, and other nonsense that will kill us, but this is a masterclass in game design in my opinion. And what really stings about this is the game blatantly warns us. Players who weren't exhausted, desperate, or even frustrated may have had the temperament to slow down and identify their surroundings. If you were calm and relaxed, which I obviously wasn't, you probably noticed the elevator's floor was splattered with blood. I imagine most of us either saw it and ignored it or realized it when it was too late. It's just funny how this giant bloodstain was a warning most of us probably missed on our first playthrough. Lastly, and what makes this elevator exceptionally sinister, is the mimic placed right before it. Originally, I wanted to discuss what makes this mimic's placing so superb, but I'd mostly be repeating myself. All the praise I've given to the elevator can be extended to this mimic as well. Subverting player expectations and discovering this oddly placed chest with bloodstains around it makes your first experience with the mimic terrifying. And like the elevator, players with sharp eyes may realize the chest is paler, breathing, and/or the chain has a different orientation. And while I can go on and on about the incredible NPCs, the challenging lower level, the minor platforming, or how to unlock the elevator, I want to bring this full circle. Although you will die a ton and some of these areas will feel like bullshit, this area beautifully embodies Miyazaki's philosophy on game difficulty. More specifically, it's up to developers to place roadblocks in front of players, and it's up to them to facilitate a meaningful feedback loop. Friction in games isn't a bad thing so long as players are aware of their mistakes. If we're aware, we experiment, discover weaknesses, and persevere forward. When executed properly, you get one of the most rewarding experiences out there. And yet, this focused approach on creating a meaningful difficulty feels like it's absent from Dark Souls 2. In my opinion, the overall challenge Souls games provide comes from learning attack patterns, endeavoring rough environments, deliberately esoteric mechanics, the lack of player onboarding, and the punishing nature of the Souls economy. Compare this with DS2's myriad of traps, contextless puzzles, resource scarcity, reliance on ambushes, hilarious enemy lock-on ranges, and the health loss mechanic, and I think it's easy to see where Tanemura and FromSoft missed the mark. While I could easily talk about the mediocre bosses, how bad the game actually sounds, and how the insane quality of the DLC highlights how rough the development cycle must have been, I want to make something very clear. I don't hate this game. I've read, spoke with, and heard people who hate this game and act like it doesn't do anything good. While I agree that it falls short of the original, there are undeniably some great quality of life changes and new ideas like power stancing. Like I said earlier, I think DS2 has some great levels, character building is a ton of fun, and they were ambitious enough to take risks. When I first played this game, my complaints could best be described as it's not Dark Souls, but this video provided me with an opportunity to dive into the nuances of its shortcomings and to give Dark Souls 2 another chance. Ultimately, I respect DS2 even if it's not my favorite, and I won't look at you any different if it's yours. Living in a time where publishers and developers are risk averse and games cost a ton of money, DS2 triumphantly stands as what games used to be, throwing shit at the wall to see what sticks. Regardless of my thoughts on the final product, I have a ton of respect for FromSoft allowing a pair of brand new directors to oversee their company's most important sequel. Now that I'm thinking about it, this is actually pretty similar to Elden Ring Night Rain. While I haven't played it, I heard it was a far more experimental game helmed by first-time director Junya Ishizaki. Sure, Miyazaki is still directing FromSoft's bigger projects, but providing the next generation of game developers an opportunity to experiment is invaluable. Even though I consider Dark Souls 2 the worst of the trilogy, and I recommend Dark Souls 1 and Dark Souls 3 over it, that doesn't mean Dark Souls 2 is a bad game. Dark Souls 2 is a game that I respect even though I don't love. It's a game more focused on carving its own path than refining the classic it was birthed from. It represents a studio who isn't scared to take risks and is willing to support their employees, and while it's far from my personal favorite, that doesn't mean you won't join the millions of passionate fans who absolutely adore this game. Alright, thanks for making it to the end of the video if you're here, and if you like the content and what I do over here, please consider supporting my efforts by becoming a channel member or subscribe on Twitch, where you'll receive early video access, a special Discord role, access to my scripts and outlines, emotes, and more. And a huge shout out to Bubbletea, who creates some of the best Persona and Atlas content. He's also given me some feedback on videos, so hopefully content and stuff gets better on my end, but yeah, super cool dude, and you should definitely check out his channel if you're into Persona, Megaten, Kingdom Hearts, Final Fantasy, or other JRPG franchises. Now, a couple of questions before we get out of here. So would you be interested in seeing Tanimura direct another game? Personally, I would be super interested, given, he has a better development cycle, and you don't just lose a director midway through and then are made to stitch a game together. That'd be pretty cool. Which is your favorite Dark Souls game? Do you think Elden Ring is FromSoft's best game? If DS2 is your favorite, I'm genuinely curious. And if it isn't, what is your favorite FromSoft game? Are you excited for the Duskbloods? What's your favorite weapon to use? How'd you get into Dark Souls? And let's keep the conversation going. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Feel free to join the Discord. Little side note, I'm streaming on the channel now, and if you want to see the rest of the streams, they are all under a playlist that say like live stream VODs or live stream playlist. You can find them all in the playlist in the channel, but I'm gonna get out of here. This video is already long enough. It doesn't need to be longer, and I will catch you guys in the next one.